What's up, y'all? You're listening to the Extra Point College Football Podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Carnes, joined as always by my co-host, Daniel Hammock. Daniel, we are almost done with a full weekend of college football. We are in the fourth quarter of Ole Miss and Louisville. Ole Miss currently up 36-10 on Louisville, so I'll give you that pick. That was a good pick. But we got a full weekend to talk about. A lot of big games this week. We had 5 ranked-unranked matchups, so we got a lot to pack in, but I think we have to start with the biggest game of the weekend, and that was the top 5 matchup in Charlotte between Georgia and Clemson. Dawgs win that game 10-3. Let's just dive in, Daniel. What are your biggest takeaways from this game? Does this say more about Georgia, more about Clemson? Did we learn something from both? Like, where do you want to go with this game?
Yeah, so it's crazy because it's like you look at it, it's like raise your hand if you picked 13 total points scored in this game. Like, yeah, I was on the over. There was a lot of late juice to everybody picking the under. It was like 51.5, I think, was the pick, which normally around 55 points is like a normal college game nowadays. So it's like basically they're saying it's going to be a little bit lower scoring than normal, but they really didn't know what to do with it. So I was like, no, I think these offenses are going to really open it up. So it's very opposite of what I was expecting. No offensive touchdowns scored, obviously. So that's wild. As far as what it says, I think that's more that's difficult because I think that the side of the ball that was most interesting was Georgia's defense and Clemson's offense. So it's like, do you want to talk about how great Georgia's defense was, or how concerned you might be of Clemson's offense? Because Georgia's offense didn't produce a touchdown either, but it just felt different. Georgia possessed the ball for 30 minutes of game clock time, whereas Clemson possessed it for 15 minutes. So, they doubled their time of possession. It just felt like a little bit different of a little different game plan. I feel like Georgia was just more or less fine with, taking these, they're trying to run Clemson sideline to sideline. Both these defensive lines were great. They seemed like they were just taking these check downs and doing these kinds of things. And, Clemson was trying to push the ball down the field a little bit, but they simply weren't having time. That offensive line was just getting destroyed by Georgia's front 7. 7 sacks. That really tells the story of the game, because there was probably 5 or 6 more where Georgia was on their heels about to get a sack and DJ made a play, whether that was, getting a ball to a receiver or getting rid of the ball just out of bounds. So he was under duress most of the game, to the point where it didn't matter how many Georgia brought. There was sacks with 3 down linemen. There was sacks with 5 guys coming. So it was a interesting game plan. Georgia played 3 safeties most of the game. I noticed that they walked Lewis Cine up into the box a good bit, and just kind of gave different looks to Clemson. I think that messed some things up for Clemson. I think that you were really big on it from the start about the whole rushing aspect of this matchup, in the sense that Clemson was going to need to establish the run, and after losing the ACC's like all-time leading rusher, how are they going to do that in Travis Etienne? And I think it was it Lynn J. Dixon? One of the backs did have a 10-yard run, and that was the only carry that they had. I think it was Lynn J. Dixon, and then everybody else was either negative or had a bunch of rushes for, like a yard a carry kind of thing. I think obviously they ended with 2 yards rushing. What I said did come true. Both quarterbacks had negative rushing yards for the game. That was kind of like my guarantee. Yep. So both quarterbacks had negative rushing yards. DJ had a little bit more negative rushing yards because he was sacked more. JT Daniels was only sacked once, I believe. So that's really the biggest difference. It's like both defensive lines played well. Clemson's disrupted what Georgia wanted to do, but they dropped 8. So Georgia did not pursue down the field like they would typically do. at least what we're expecting. So I took a lot of these dump offs where it was more of a safe game plan, but they didn't necessarily look like they were disrupted. I say all the havoc was on the other side of the ball. So that was more of when Georgia's defense was on the field, Clemson's offense was on the field. That's where all the havoc was.
We talked about before the season that we think the three most important positions in the field are quarterback, wide receiver. That's become a lot more apparent in the last 5 years with explosive offenses, and defensive line. And the reason for defensive line is because if you can get pressure with your defensive line, with your 3 or 4 defensive linemen, it messes up everyone's game plan. Because if you're stopping the run with 4, then if they're going to try to pass the ball and you can drop 7 or 8 into coverage and still get pressure on the quarterback, still not give him enough time to throw, there is no game plan to beat that. And that's what Georgia did on Saturday night. They sent their defensive lineman, and Dan Lanning called. I mean, it was a perfect game. I've really tried to dial back. I've rewatched the game and watched more film, and I'm like, I'm trying to watch what I see here. But since I've been seriously watching football, I have not seen a defensive performance more impressive than the one I watched from Georgia on Saturday night. I mean, the way they stunted on the defensive line, the way they disguised blitzes, the way they disguised coverages, and that interception, it was a very well-designed play where DJ made a good read. It was just a really well-disguised coverage where Chris Smith, looked like he was playing outside, played inside, was able to get to the ball and take it to the house. And that ended up being the difference in the game. You mentioned it. I mean, I talked about before the game that I thought whichever team ran the ball better would win, and that the last 3 times Clemson had lost, they got severely outrushed. And I mean, final total 121-2 in the rush yards category. Georgia ahead there, and that was the difference in the game. DJ sacked 7 times. I mean, they just made the game difficult for DJ, and the offense never got anything going. The good news for Clemson is you do not have another defense on the schedule like the one you just played Saturday night. You have the chance to go win 11 games, go to the ACC championship, beat whoever comes out of the Coastal. My goodness, the Coastal didn't look great on Saturday. So beat whoever comes out of the Coastal. And you have 12 games to get ready to face into the defense like you face on Monday night in the college football playoff. Because from the looks of it, I mean, Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State all have defenses that have an elite pass rush and elite defensive line. But you're not, if you're Clemson, you're not going to see that again during the season. And so that's the good news for Clemson. You can still run the table. Everything's still ahead of you. For Georgia, got to be better through the air. Got to find a way to be more explosive in the pass game. They did have some guys out, but I know Clemson dropped 8. But Georgia, same thing. You've got some weeks to get it right. They've got some more tough games in the schedule, but not for a few weeks. So hopefully you can get some of those guys back, establish a vertical game plan. JT Daniels, I think, was very efficient, but again, that offense has got to be more explosive. But if I'm a Georgia fan, I mean, thrill with the win, huge win. I would say this is a top 3 win for Kirby Smart since his time at Georgia. He needed this win. And just, again, so impressed with his defense. JT Daniels said it after the game. If the defense is playing like that, we're not going to have to score much more than 4 to win. So, I mean, this was in the Dabo 20 era. Clemson's never been held to 3 points until tonight. Yards per play was at 3. That's the lowest since Dabo's been the head coach at Clemson. So really a historic performance against Clemson for Georgia on Saturday night.
And both of these teams, Jacob, you just mentioned it, but more specifically the offenses. We expect both of these offenses to be among the nation's elite by year's end. I mean, but even as soon as next week, we could see both of them scoring 40 points and looking like they're back to normal. This literally could have just been Clash of the Titans of the defenses, basically. And, once the game got going, it was like, all right, the game plan is survive. So whatever you have to do to win in this box.
And Venables had a good game plan too. And if you want to, for the people who say that Kirby's not going to have a vertical passing game, well, you know who didn't believe that? Brent Venables, because their game plan was to take away Georgia's vertical passing game. They dropped 7-8 in the coverage on every single play. And that's why Georgia had a lot, JT Daniels was 22 of 30 for 135 yards. And if you watch the game, it makes a lot of sense because he drops back, checks the vertical routes, nothing there. throws a ball at the line of scrimmage or 2 or 3 yards past the line of scrimmage and hopes that
the leader in targets was freshman Brock Bowers, the tight end. Second leader in targets was Zamir White, I believe, out of the backfield. So it's like it was, and then the next one was another back. So it was like tight end, running back, and you're like, okay, well, if those are your top 3 in targets, you probably just everything was right around that inside of 10 yards mark. So that's it. It really, was apparent. I mean, 22 of 30 is not bad because you're thinking, oh, hey, like, he's completing more, he's keeping them on the field, that kind of, complimentary ball we talked about. But yeah, as far as the yardage goes, it's surprising to see only 130 yards.
And to your point, we can be sitting here 4 weeks from now going, oh, wow, these defenses are unbelievable, watching what these offenses are doing now to these other teams. And I think that's very likely. Let's stay in the SEC, kind of. LSU. We were wrong.
I was really wrong. I was like, LSU is I just think they're gonna dominate. 21 points. I said they're gonna win by 21 points. Coach O brought that energy in when he said, "Hey, bring that sissy blue shirt down here," to that UCLA fan on the walk in. But Jacob, did my eyes deceive me? Was UCLA more physical than LSU?
Your eyes did not deceive you. That's what I thought. That's another game that I've gone back and rewatched. UCLA won on the line of scrimmage. DTR played a masterful game. I think Max Johnson played a really good game. I mean, he was 26 of 46, 330, 3 touchdowns, and an interception. Outside of that, hilarious behind the back throw. Had a really good game. But you're right. They were the more physical team.
And that's like so that's something that Chip Kelly has always wanted, to be, but it's taken him a while because, he slow plays the recruiting and he's really big on the development, the training table, and like the juice bar, whatever they got over there, all their nutrition and all this kind of stuff. But, we're like, okay, they did this to Hawaii. It's like, all right, now they're going to play a real team. And yeah, there could have been some stuff with the whole, Hurricane Ida with LSU and all this kind of stuff being displaced, getting thrown off your routine. Football is all about routine. So that's definitely something to play into it. But over the course of the game, I just feel like it would have played out differently if UCLA wasn't as physical. And they just, like you were saying, both lines of scrimmage, I just felt like they held up really good on defense, did what they needed to do. But offensively, I mean, I just felt like whatever play they really wanted, it just was there. And anytime LSU kind of inched their way back and looked like they were going to make it a game, that's when you'd see an explosive play on UCLA's end.
This is classic. I mean, this is Oregon Chip Kelly.
Yeah.
I mean, Chip Kelly is back, and we could end up being like, oh, this was one of these, Joe Milton Heisman last year after Michigan's first game.
Right. Overreaction kind of thing. Yeah.
But I mean, this offense is fun to watch, and it's the explosive running game, that pin and pull, that GT counter they run with the quarterback. And I mean, I mentioned this before the season, DTR is, hey, one of those Oregon quarterbacks from right around that 2010 area.
Yeah, it's exactly what Chip wants.
He's wearing number 1 too. De'Aaron cool, Thomas, man. Was that his that was that quarterback, right, for Oregon? We'll figure it out. But Thomas, was it De'Aaron Thomas?
I don't know.
Anyway, yeah, quintessential Oregon quarterback. That run game was explosive. The way the line moves is fun. They won the line of scrimmage. For me, though, there is no excuse for LSU. I know about Hurricane Ida and all that. You've got so much talent on that roster.
Right.
There is no excuse to come out and get blown off the line of scrimmage like that. UCLA is not your size or speed or talent on the line of scrimmage. So that's where I'm like, you've got no excuse. They showed a lack of effort. They've got a long way to go. I think this is looking more like a Gene Chizik at Auburn. LSU is not going to give him grace this year. Yeah. They gave him grace last year. They will not accept you doing that again this year. So long way to go for LSU. I was wrong about this game. I really impressed with UCLA, and you'll see that in our updated rankings. It'll drop this week.
Last year, too, to your point with LSU, it was like, okay, well, they're coming off this most amazing season ever, so they get a pass for that. But there was a lot of like internal stuff, like people, Arik Gilbert sitting out the rest of the season. Obviously, you had Jamar Chase sit out the season, and then you had one or two other players that just stopped, halfway through the season, stopped playing. And so it's like the locker room. And so locker room and lack of effort, I kind of put those in the same category as like, hey, you got some internal like program issues. And, in addition to the coaching, they tried to pin it all on Bo Pelini when they fired him. But there's more to this story. So it doesn't look like we're quite out of the woods yet with LSU. Hopefully for their sake, they can turn around, get it going, get it more back to the classic LSU. And this is just a really good UCLA team. But if it's the former, that they are actually what they were last year, this could be that spiraling LSU team that is a 500 team at best and, loses some of these games. So
That's right. Let's go to Atlanta. Mercedes-Benz Stadium, Alabama's second home, as was the Georgia Dome. I mean,
rinse and repeat, right?
What's funny is I feel like you were a lot higher on Miami in the offseason.
Right.
And we talked about it. And then I'm like buying into, dude, like it's 19.5. Like they can keep within 3 scores, backdoor cover. Like,
I talked you into it, man. I'm sorry.
Like they replaced 3 offensive linemen, all those receivers, new quarterback, new running back, new offensive coordinator. Like
new
Miami can stay in
coach.
this thing.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I mean, same Alabama. And I mean, total yards on first down, 228. Average yards gained on first down, 7.2. 500 total yards. I mean, 4 for 4 in the red zone. This offense looked like last year, looked like nothing's got to beat. Bryce Young, though, different kind of quarterback, a lot more mobile. I was really impressed with it. Kind of ruins the defensive line's plan if he takes 3 steps and now he's clean to make a throw on the field. And then it's like, oh, wow, here's another receiver just streaking across the field.
Something I noticed with him is that he's so quick and just sudden with his movements that it gives him a lot of time. So it's almost like it's not just buying time and throwing on the run. It's like, no. He just ran out there and created another pocket, stepped up and make a throw. So
right.
It's like
got his feet set.
Exactly. It's not like this, oh, you have to throw under duress. He was never under duress.
Nope.
That's the
All
thing
day.
with him. He just could go here, there, wherever. And it was like he was gliding. It's like I understand why these 24/7 guys put him as like the highest ranked quarterback and like the highest rated player, and where he was over, it was like a 1.0 rather than a 90.99, whatever. The recruiting rankings and stuff that we always talk about, it's like, okay, so they weren't just blowing smoke. This guy is the real deal. And he was kept off the field by Mac Jones last year, who looks like the real deal in the NFL now. And Bryce Young just did this. Jamison Williams had a great game. For him to have been run off by Ohio State, you have to think about the players in that room, and he's doing this here. I mean, this is truly impressive. Jacob, you gave it before when we were picking it, but the average score of an Alabama kickoff game was like 40-12, and this was 44-13.
And I still took Miami in the points.
Still took Miami in the points. And I took the over, and I was like, oh, the over is going to hit because all it needs one more touchdown, and it didn't happen. But by anybody. But that I also loved on SEC Nation. They had Devontae Smith on there, and they were going around, and everybody's kind of giving their little hot take. And Devontae Smith, who probably knows this team better than anybody because he was just on this team, he says, yeah, Alabama's going to win by 30. And they won by 31. Everybody laughed at him when he said by 30. And I'm like, I mean,
he knows. He knew what was about to happen.
He's not wrong. Those boys it's just a different breed, man. The running backs, I feel like they rotated well. It was great. That's another thing I wanted to say. Trey Sanders, it was great to see him get on the field. I think he scored a touchdown. He had a couple of really good strong runs. Looks like he's finally healthy. And, he's one of those guys that injury bug has hit him his first 2 years. Man, I hope he has a big year this year for his sake. I know that he's an NFL type back. And it's great to see him, kind of realizing his potential.
Where do you want to go from here, Daniel? I'll kick it to you, and then I'll have go ahead.
So I was going to say, it's like one of the things we like to do last year, kind of adopting it maybe this year, something we learned or just something that surprised us for the weekend. I mean, there's a theme, definitely. There's a couple themes, but one of them was the ACC, kind of questionable, especially those high ranked teams. So I've got 6 wins and 7 losses. That's because one of the teams, 2 teams played each other. So there's not 13 teams, there's 14 teams. But, you know, Clemson lost on national stage to Georgia. We went over that. Bama and Miami. I mean, Bama gets everybody. So those were you could kind of put them in their own box. But UNC, North Carolina, man, they were in the top 10. This was kind of, a big year for them. We were excited about this game against Virginia Tech. And I mean, Virginia Tech just came out and surprised everybody and did what they do. Virginia Tech beats them. I mean, Charlotte beat Duke. That was surprising and not surprising all in one, because Charlotte's been a program for all of like 38 minutes. So I don't know, I don't know how they were able to pull that off. Currently, Ole Miss and Louisville is going on, and Ole Miss is running up and down the field on Louisville. And then Georgia Tech lost to Northern Illinois. So just a bunch of, and then so the other loss was Florida State to Notre Dame, which that was, we'll touch on that, but that was just a great game in and of itself. But for a little bit, I mean, it just looked like Notre Dame was just going to, pound them into the turf. FSU kind of got some life from some decisions Notre Dame made,
Yep.
and then kind of, made a great game that went to overtime. But I mean, and then you look at the wins, it just kind of left some to be desired. Boston College beat Colgate. Virginia did beat William and Mary, so they took that two.
That's 2 wins.
Yeah. Wake Forest beat Old Dominion, which I thought that was a freight line, not a school. And then NC State beat UCF. That was actually one of the more impressive wins, but it's still USF, but it's still USF. And then Syracuse beat Ohio. So and then of course Virginia Tech did beat North Carolina. So that's an impressive win, but that's in conference. So
but every ranked ACC team lost.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's just one of these you hate to do this because it almost feels like bowl season when you just talk about non-conference and everything. But at the same time, how else are you supposed to measure them otherwise? What metric are you going to use? I mean, a lot of these teams played their peers. But then the ones that played down, that's what I'm really worried about. Like Georgia Tech, I'm really high on Georgia Tech this year as far as what they could be, and they come in and lose to Northern Illinois in their first game. What's going on? I mean, that shouldn't happen. Northern Illinois was 0-6 last year. Duke to Charlotte, Will Healy, everybody likes talking about him, and he's a fast riser, but it's supposed to just be this guy that we talk about as their head coach, and then we say, oh, they might cover and keep it close. But it's no, they won, So those are the ones that I really don't feel great about, is the ACC playing down competition. And yeah, some of these teams win, and then some of them lose, and then they lost to their peers. So definitely got to keep your eye there. Pac-12 might be on the come up with UCLA and think about like that. And then maybe the ACC is on the downswing. I don't know.
So you say Pac-12 on the come up. I think you mean the Pac-12 South on the come up, because the North also had an awful day.
Had some yikes.
Included in that, here's another group I wanted to talk about. FCS. This was historic. So the most wins in a season of FCS teams over FBS teams is 8, from what I could tell. There were 6 this weekend. Just this weekend. UC Davis beats Tulsa 19-17. Eastern Washington beats UNLV 35-33. South Dakota State beats Colorado State 42-23. Killed them. Holy Cross beats UConn 38-28. And here's the 2 big ones. ETSU, East Tennessee State, 23-3 over Vanderbilt. Montana, 13-7 over Washington. That's ranked Washington. That's Washington that you and I picked to win the Pac-12 North. I mean, and all these games were at home. FCS teams got paid to come and beat these teams on the road. This was unheard of a decade ago. And now it happened 6 times this weekend. There's no excuses for these teams. I don't care how good that FCS program is. They don't have the resources or the athletes that you do. They're getting paid to come take an L, and they just beat you on your home turf. Historic. The one I'm most worried about is Washington. I'm a Washington fan. That's awful. There is no excuse. This is a year where you've got the weapons to win your division, go back to the Pac-12 championship, and you absolutely blew. Like, everything's still ahead of them, obviously, because it wasn't a conference loss, but that's embarrassing. Like,
Right.
you mentioned the ACC, that's the Pac-12 North. Great start for the Alliance. So,
Oh yeah.
I mean, what an opening weekend for the Alliance. Where do you want to go next?
Basically from there, I mean, we were talking. You mentioned the Alliance, the Big 12 or the Pac-12, the Big 10. I'm gonna get it eventually. So Big 10, they had a couple of big time games. You had the Penn
Yeah.
State Wisconsin game at noon on Saturday, which similar to the Georgia Clemson game in that there was low scoring and there was a lot of defense and things of that nature.
Yep.
You were on a flight, so you asked me to keep you updated because that flight actually did not have Fox. And I'm like,
Delta
it was
had
Fox.
every other net, like not Fox Sports South, like FS2.
Yeah.
No, like regular Fox.
Like Big
Anyway,
Fox, like
come on, Delta.
like Fox, big noon kickoff. So they didn't have it. So I was trying to keep you. It was really easy to keep you updated. It was just punt and then another punt and another punt and another punt. Then your plane landed. You finally got to watch a little action, and they started to score a little bit. But yeah, that was maybe Penn State coming back and being more like a national power and showing everybody that we're high on Wisconsin's defense already. So that was interesting in and of itself. And then kind of the opposite of that game was Ohio State and Minnesota, just a bunch of scoring. And it was a bunch of fun to watch,
Yeah.
when Ohio State was struggling, you started to think, hey, is Minnesota going to do this? And then, CJ Stroud finally hit his stride and started to throw the ball down the field and hit the likes of Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson and hit some of those long, explosive touchdowns. That was indicative for me. I was like, hey, Minnesota gave much more of a fight than I thought they would. And it kind of felt like that 2019 Minnesota. So maybe that Big Ten West is going to be more competitive because Iowa looked good. I'm excited about them this week, watching them in the Cyhawk game. But that was a fun game in and of itself.
Ohio State will walk away saying, all right, they're everything I thought they were. And there were some people who were eating their words in the second half when Stroud came out and look, he's a freshman on the road with a full capacity crowd he's never played in.
College pass, all that stuff.
Yeah, y'all calm down. He settled down the second half and was elite the second half. But I'll walk away impressed with Minnesota, like you said. Like, even in a loss, lose by 14 to Ohio State is pretty good because this Ohio State team, they're getting off the bus, and I'm saying there's 42 points. Like, 42 right there. There you can, like, book it.
Right.
So I'll walk away impressed with Minnesota. How about last night's game? So we're recording this on Monday. Notre Dame and Florida State. I'm going to let you talk about Mackenzie Milton in a moment because that deserves a lot of credit. But I did just want to shout out the winner of this game and the player who played the best, and that was Notre Dame. They looked really impressive. Obviously, have some stuff to clean up on defense. I honestly think, I talked about this. They let Florida State get back in that game.
Mm-hmm.
There were two drives where they were on Florida State side of the field and had a 4th and 1 and punted and a 4th and 2 and punted, which if they go for that, could have scored on either of those drives. And Florida State ended up scoring on both of those drives where Notre Dame punted. But Jack Cohn, we have called him Jake Fromm Cohn. And I think that can be a good and a bad thing. Jake Fromm was super efficient, but Jack Cohn showed some arm strength last night. Notre Dame has some receivers they did not have last year. Last year, they had an athletic quarterback and not a lot of receiver talent. This year, they got receiver talent and a quarterback who's got a cannon, but not as athletic. And Jack Cohn goes 26 of 35 for 366 yards and 4 touchdowns. So, I mean, it really impressed Notre Dame. This offense is going to be a lot better than I anticipated. They're going up in my rankings, but Florida State, what an environment. What a story. I mean, you're wearing the shirt. Talk to me about some Seminoles.
So I really enjoyed watching this because at first, Jacob, you and I picked on different sides of this. And you took Notre Dame to cover, and I took Florida State because I just was feeling that juice, the whole Bobby Bowden thing, really feeling like they're going to take a step in this next year with Mike Norvell. and just having a little bit more quarterback situation going on. Well, I'd say the first couple of drives into the game, I was like, wow, I was dumb. I should have seen this coming. Jacob, you're absolutely right. They're a previous college football playoff team, Notre Dame, and they're just reloading. They should be fine. Well, Florida State showed they didn't have any quit, and I was really impressed with that down the stretch. The biggest thing though is the offensive line. They weren't great by any means, but they were able to actually run the ball. Now, that is a huge help because these quarterbacks have been running for their lives for the past few years. And if you could run the ball, that at least will take some of the heat off of them. Whether or not they can pass block is another thing. But Joshua Corbin, 144 yards on 15 carries, so almost 10 yards a carry, 9.6 yards a carry. Treshawn Ward, 11 carries for 76 yards. That's just south of 7 yards a carry. And then Tuafili, he had 34 yards on 6 carries. So he almost had 6 yards a carry as well. So these guys all had big nights as far as running the ball. I felt like down the stretch, I kept seeing 10-yard carries by these backs as they'd rotate them in. Jordan Travis started this game at quarterback. I think that he's a good leader, and I think he's a very talented player. He ended up rushing for some yards as well, but he was sacked several times as well, so it doesn't show up in the box score. He had a 25-yard run, and he had a couple plays where it was like, okay, he's a very talented athlete and needs to be on the field. He had 3 interceptions. He did throw 2 touchdown passes, so he had moments, but they were still somewhat inconsistent in that pass game. And he had to come off the field because of something. Maybe it was a helmet or something came off the field.
His helmet came off.
And so it was like, oh, okay, it's Milton's time. But this is why we love college football and crowds, because he came on and got the ovation and the, cheer that he deserved for what he went through these past 2 years. So great story, but the story isn't anything if you can't play ball. I mean, in any sense, in his first snap, he drops back and throws like a 30-yard pass complete. So that was special. And then the offense didn't miss a beat, and they just kept rolling, and he leads them on a couple of drives and gets this thing pushed to overtime. And, there's you don't want to say moral victory, that kind of stuff, but Florida State's in this part of we joked about it. They're in this part of the rebuild about where these are the types of losses that they need to start getting, where they're not being blown out. I think you mentioned it was they go from
blowout losses to crushing losses,
and then they start winning games. Yep. So this is part of the process. Norvell, you have been high on Norvell this whole time. And last year, it was harder to be high on him towards the end of the year. I remember thinking, is Florida State just a program that's in disrepair? And then after seeing him recruit over the offseason and then seeing this start to the season, I feel confident that Florida State is on the come up. They are turning things around, and I came away impressed with both teams. I feel like Notre Dame under Jack Cohn is not going to be this pedestrian offense. And then I feel like Florida State doesn't have this quit in them that they did the past few years ever since Jimbo left. And I think they're actually going to win some ACC games this year and put themselves in a position to go to a good bowl game.
Florida State's in a really good spot. Momentum-wise recruiting. So Florida State took a gamble. They invited close to 100 recruits to this game, knowing that it's the only game on. About 10 of those were on official visits. The rest were on unofficial visits. But that's a big risk considering this could have been a game where you lose by 14 or 21 points to Notre Dame. They took the gamble. And this is one of those times where it pays off. You took Notre Dame, a team that's been to 2 college football playoffs in the last 3 seasons, to overtime with a chance to win. And you can literally sell to recruits like, hey, scoreboard, 3 points. You can be the difference. By the time you get here, we're not losing by 3 points. We're going to win this game by 7 points. We're going to win this game by 14 points. Right. And that's huge as a coaching staff to you can sell hypotheticals for a little bit when you first come in. You got to start to get some results. I think this is one of these results that you can sell to recruits. Like, hey, we're this close and you can be the difference. Like we need players like you. So again, and like you said, impressed with both teams. Notre Dame went up in my rankings when, we're going to release this soon, but they went up in my rankings with this win, as did Florida State. So really impressed with both teams. Fun game. This game actually had the highest viewership all weekend on the Game On, so highest opening weekend game since 2017. Insane viewership numbers. I'm all tapped out. Any other games you want to hit?
I like what you said on Twitter about both USC and Texas. So just mention them briefly.
Yes.
They were both no drama wins. And going into this, when we were picking these games, you described both of them the same way, in that both of these games were Texas and Louisiana, and then USC versus San Jose State. Both of these games, USC and Texas were both favored because of, their brand, but they both are way more talented, and they should put these teams, to rest. But, would they? And these were both games that people had circled as, quote unquote trap game or whatever you want to call it. And both of these teams, who are historic for having to make a fourth quarter comeback against the team they shouldn't, there's no drama. They just came out, played their game, and beat both of them. So I appreciated that note by you, and it made me think, hey, this might be the change. I don't know about USC. It could be for USC, but for Texas, I know that that's a big, big deal. Win that first game, and Sark kind of just looked unflappable. Just kind of came out there, even keel. Just came out, did what he needed to do, take care of business. I think is what Texas has been kind of waiting on for a while. So they may have gotten doing that.
They were composed. There was no dumb penalties. No dumb emotional stuff going on with players, which has been happening.
Card looked pretty good. He looked solid.
Yeah, he looked solid. And it was his first game. Like, was he perfect? No. Did he look solid? Yes. Again, and Josh Pate mentioned this. You can't have it both ways. You can't say I'm putting Texas on upset alert and they win by 20, and you say, well, Louisiana wasn't that good. No. You can't have it both ways. Either they were on upset alert and Texas just beat them by 20, beat the brakes off of them, or like, hey, that's what they should have done from the get-go. But you can't have it both ways. And we were both, I think Louisiana's really good. We picked them to go 10-2, and Texas beat the brakes off of them.
Yeah.
And it was an impressive win. So again, another team that rose in my rankings, Texas. And for them to be here in game one gives me a lot of confidence that they can do what we thought they might be able to do. We took a chance saying, hey, this team's capable of 10-2 with this roster and what we think this coaching staff can do. This was an impressive showing in week one. For Texas, though, doesn't end here. This week, you're going to Arkansas. So it's time to show up again and do the same thing. You go on the road and win. If you win at all on the road in an SEC environment, this game's gonna be sold out at night. I mean, if they win by a touchdown, I'm gonna be impressed with Texas.
It's an old Southwestern Conference game.
That's right.
It's a future Southeastern Conference game.
That's right. Last game. This game was one final. Ole Miss 43, Louisville 24. I was wrong. You nailed this one. They beat the brakes off of them.
And I got the under on our other picks.
Barely. I'm watching the score go up.
I know. I got worried because they scored a bunch at the end. So.
Ole Miss got the ball back with 4 minutes left. And I'm like, oh, they're scoring again.
Yeah. So.
But impressive showing from Ole Miss. They are ranked in our rankings. They'll continue to be ranked in our rankings. I can guarantee you that.
Definitely, even without Lane Kiffin. So Jeff Levy, great job calling the game. Great job by the team in general to be disciplined and not feel worried without their head coach there. So that's the makings of a team that, is on the come up. Defense looked good. I don't know if it was that Louisville was really, really bad. I think that's a lot of it, but also they looked a lot better than they did last year. They looked like a competent defense. So Otis Reese, that's a big deal. He's finally able to play a lot this year. Last year, he didn't get cleared till halfway through the season, COVID year. He's kind of that hybrid linebacker safety. So I think that there's some good players on that defense. Maybe they play together and they can go win 9-10 games this year. What if they do it?
Otis Reese led the team in tackles. So There you go. You can follow him on Twitter at DeepSouthDaniel. You can follow me on Twitter at Jacob Carnes with a K. That will do it for this edition of the Extra Point. He is Daniel. I am Jacob.